Hi. I would like to thank the Colour and Film Conference organisers, Ezra and Yuli, for inviting me to introduce the Great Barrier Reef. I'm sorry not to be with you in person today. You're in for a treat, I think. As the world's most extensive coral reef ecosystem, the Great Barrier Reef was given World Heritage status by UNESCO in 1981. Indigenous Australians interacted with the reef for thousands of years before it was submerged and have an ongoing relationship with it. It has cultural and spiritual significance. People have long dreamt of capturing the colours of the Great Barrier Reef, on film. In the late 19th century, William Saville Kent, a curator in the Natural History Department of the British Museum, spent his days naming and arranging grey coral specimens plucked from subtropical oceans. They captured his imagination. He longed to see the organisms in their native seas and living tints. And he did. Some years later, Saville Kent set sail for Australia to help establish new fisheries. He could finally see the Great Barrier Reef and its creatures in living colour. Saville Kent marvelled at the lush underwater wonderland of strange-shaped corals, tentacled mollusks, and fishes in colours that belonged in a Kandinsky painting. In 1893, Saville Kent published The Great Barrier Reef of Australia, an encyclopedia of one of the world's most delicate ecosystems. It was illustrated with his black and white photographs and with colour lithographs of fish and corals based on his own watercolours. In his era, scientists were expected to train both the mind and the eye. The Great Barrier Reef was a 1,000-mile-long thread of colour brimming with brilliant living things, Hugh Ward told audiences at the Australian Museum in 1930. He had just returned from a year-long expedition to the reef. It was woven of the stuff of which dreams and films were made, he said. Picture the films that could be made there. They would leave Hollywood for dead. Thomas Marshall from the Queensland Museum made some of the first colour motion pictures of the reef in the 1930s and 40s. Shot on 16mm Kodachrome, they toured Australia. In cities and country towns alike, crowds gathered in town halls to see the footage and to hear Marshall deliver a live narration. Fast forward to 1967, when Belgian scientists and a filmmaking team set out to make the Great Barrier Reef documentary that you're about to see. Watching the film recently, I was in awe of the astonishing, colourful sea life shown deep below the blue world above, of the film's depiction of the Great Barrier Reef, now under threat from global warming as a living organism, and of the superb film restoration by the Royal Film Archive of Belgium. Divers descend bearing lanterns and search the floor of the ocean. Myriad moving forms and hues are caught in their beams of light. They wield massive projectors and cameras in waterproof housing. The spectacle of underwater filmmaking is on display here. Watching the Great Barrier Reef, I was puzzled by the pops of red, orange, and yellow associated with the expedition team. Specimens were thrown into red and yellow buckets on the expedition boat. The hues were prominent in workers' clothing, and one underwater cameraman wore a red wetsuit. It's unusual for a nature documentary to be art directed to this degree. Was the film designed, I wondered, for the Technicolor process? In a recent memoir, legendary Australian underwater filmmaker and conservationist Valerie Taylor fills in some of the backstory. Taylor and her husband Ron were approached by one of the filmmaking team, Pierre Levie. They had considerable experience as underwater cinematographers and directors. By contrast, Levie had zero filmmaking experience, but access to lots of money. According to Valerie Taylor, he was young and he had an aristocratic air. He had seen their films and wanted them to work on an epic film of great artistry about the Great Barrier Reef. His inspiration? Rather surprisingly, the underwater footage shot for the 1965 James Bond film, Thunderball. Entranced by that film's final underwater chase sequence, Levie contacted Thunderball's producers and he arranged to buy all their filmmaking equipment and key props, including the scuba equipment and red wetsuit worn by Sean Connery. Valerie and Ron Taylor were skeptical about whether the film project would ever come to fruition, but a year later, a specially fitted ship arrived down under. There were 20 scientists, 75 sailors, and room for 4 filmmakers. Valerie Taylor was astonished at the sheer quantity of gear the team unpacked. 35mm cameras with underwater housing, tripods, banks of light, projectors, and an industrial-sized generator. As she wrote, it seemed that Levie had come to colonize Queensland. In the end, Valerie Taylor and her husband took the money and swam, even if Valerie was required to wear a gold wetsuit. They had never been paid so well, and this opportunity to spend 6 months mapping the Great Barrier Reef was just too good to refuse. Given a list of relatively easy shots to procure, the Taylors quickly got to work, and then, mission accomplished, did things their way. The Australian filmmakers reef-hopped from a small boat. They had learnt to treat the living creatures of the reef with some sensitivity, swimming alongside them and using minimal lights. By contrast, Levie brought out his barrage of equipment and tried to set up effectively an underwater studio. Organisms were poked and prodded to get them moving in shot. The waters soon became muddied. Massive bright lights killed many of the corals they were aimed at. A cautionary tale. Even allowing for the way that time and frequent retelling colours autobiographical memory, it seems clear, or it seems likely, that Valerie and Ron Taylor shot much of the spectacular underwater footage in the Great Barrier Reef, as they claim. Unfortunately, what are considered ethical practices in environmental filmmaking have changed a lot since the 1960s. Decades later, there is still much to celebrate about the Great Barrier Reef documentary. The expedition members and filmmakers aim to contribute to our understanding of the reef's ecosystem. They saw the camera as an instrument of both scientific and artistic discovery. Their film provides us, I think, with a powerful and lyrical record of the diversity of one of the world's most iconic natural wonders. Now, as I said before, under threat from climate change, coral bleaching, and pollution. I'll leave you to enjoy this wonderful restoration of the Great Barrier Reef documentary. I suggest that you look out for the James Bond-inspired underwater chase sequence and that red wetsuit. Thank you.